On the 4th of March 2006, Joe Calzaghe faced Jeff Lacy. Jeff Lacy was going to be the next big star, with a record of 21-0, 16 of which ended with Lacy knocking his opponents out or forcing them to retire on the stool. Jeff Lacy was a fearsome opponent and was predicted to overpower Calzaghe with ease. Lacy was the younger, stronger, and fresher man. Jeff Lacy was the fighter to introduce Joe Calzaghe to the American consciousness and end his American dream. This fight was supposed to prove that Joe Calzaghe was overrated and another example of British bias. That's not quite what happened though. Instead, Joe Calzaghe would show us why the floor of the boxing ring is called a canvas. Like an artist at the peak of his powers, he would show us the fine art of boxing. He would put together one of the most beautiful, complete, and perfect performances of all time. Joe Calzaghe would retire as the longest reigning super middleweight in boxing history. He held the title for over 10 years and defended it against 20 opponents. He defeated greats such as Bernard Hopkins, Chris Eubank, and Roy Jones Jr. He is part of a very exclusive club who retired with a perfect record, 46-0. So why is Joe Calzaghe largely forgotten about in the public consciousness? His name not often listed among the boxing gods. To answer that question, we must go back. Joe Calzaghe was born on the 23rd of March 1972 to Italian father Enzo and Welsh mother Jackie. With this, he was blessed with a unique combination: Italian flair and a Welsh heart. The family settled in Newbridge, South Wales. Joe developed a keen interest in boxing from a young age. At age 10, he joined the now infamous Newbridge Amateur Boxing Club. Calzaghe went on to build an outstanding amateur career with 110 victories and just 10 defeats. Joe was trained by his father Enzo, who had no boxing experience himself. Enzo was instead a musician. Enzo Calzaghe's training philosophy was built around rhythm, feel, and repetition. Enzo didn't see boxing as a collection of isolated techniques. He saw it as flow. Like a composer creating a symphony, Enzo would train Joe to fight in rhythm, build into a crescendo of punches. Joe would be encouraged to leave his father for an established trainer many times, and Joe refused time and time again. This loyalty would soon pay off, as the father and son duo would soon reach heights far higher than any deep valley of South Wales. From the 1st of October 1993 to the 5th of June 1997, Joe Calzaghe would fight 22 times. Just one opponent survived to hear the final bell. Calzaghe's power, speed, and work rate proved too much for any opponent unfortunate enough to face him. On the 11th of October 1997, Calzaghe would face the one and only Chris Eubank. The two would fight for the vacant super middleweight title. Chris Eubank had an outstanding record of 45-2-2. It would take just seconds for Calzaghe to knock Eubank down. Eubank would fight bravely over 12 rounds, however the point was clear. Eubank was overwhelmed by the pace, work rate, and skill of the young Welshman. As such, the torch and the belt were handed to Calzaghe. Calzaghe would keep both of these items for 11 dominant years. Joe didn't fight like a classic British boxer. He didn't fight like an American star. He didn't fight like anyone else. Joe broke his hand early in his career. This caused him to have to punch in a unique style, so much so that he was sometimes called an old slapper. In fact, Jeff Lacy called him this as an insult, and we all know how that story ended. His hands came from angles that you weren't taught to expect. His rhythm broke yours. His volume drowned your strategy. He wasn't trying to knock you out early, he was trying to make you quit, mentally, physically, and structurally. Opponents didn't often get caught, they got worn down. And that made it hard to sell highlights, because domination doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it just looks relentless. This is where the criticism always goes. Who did Joe Calzaghe actually beat? As if longevity doesn't matter, as if remaining undefeated doesn't count, and as if never being solved isn't its own achievement. Chris Eubank, Bernard Hopkins, Roy Jones Jr. Not at their youngest, but still champions, still dangerous and still respected. And here's the part that people forget. Calzaghe didn't just beat them, he outworked them, outthought them and outlasted them. Hopkins couldn't bully him, Jones couldn't outspeed him, and Eubank couldn't intimidate him. They all tried to impose their identity, and all failed. The victory against Hopkins was particularly sweet, as Hopkins would famously state before the fight that he would never let a white boy beat him. Joe Calzaghe never chased America. He didn't relocate, he didn't rebrand, and he didn't become something he wasn't. He trained in Wales, he lived quietly, and he stayed close to home. And boxing punished him for it. Because the sport doesn't like fighters who don't need it. It prefers dependency. Fighters who need the spotlight, need the money, and need the validation. And Calzaghe needed none of that. He fought because he loved it. He retired because his body told him to. And he walked away undefeated because he could. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Boxing fans don't always celebrate perfection. They want flaws, they want collapse, and they want a reason to forgive perfection. Joe Calzaghe gave them none. So instead, they question him, they diminish him, and they've moved on. And only later, when the noise faded, did the record start to speak. 46 fights, 46 wins. That's not an accident, that's mastery. Joe Calzaghe didn't leave scars on boxing culture. He didn't redefine trash talk, he didn't change promotion, and he didn't build a brand. He just did the hardest thing in the sport over and over again. He won. And then he left. No scandal, no comeback, no desperate attempt to stay relevant, which is exactly why he deserves to be remembered. Greatness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it works quietly, consistently, and relentlessly, until history has no choice but to acknowledge it. Joe Calzaghe didn't ask boxing to love him, and he didn't need to. Joe Calzaghe didn't need anything from the sport. He had the best trainer he could ask for in his father. He had the best training equipment in the Welsh Hills, and he had all the riches he needed in his family. And that might be why, years later, his name still unsettles debates. Because undefeated doesn't lie, consistency doesn't fade, and dominance doesn't require permission. This was an ode to my favourite boxer of all time, Joe Calzaghe, the pride of Wales, the Welsh Dragon. If not one of the greatest to ever do it, certainly the greatest that nobody talks about.